And now, everybody, it's time for the casual Q&A. This is the time, turn on your cameras, put on your cowboy hat, do what you need to do to get comfortable because we're going to chat here. So we've got pages upon pages of questions, but if you would like to get them in the chat box right now, if some of you are keen on this, I might call on you to ask the question to our speakers and we'll just kind of go from there. Okay, so looks like we do have a question coming in from NFU. Is that National Farmers Union? So they're wanting to know, what are folks charging for grazing cover crops on a per head per day rate? Rick or Jimmy, do you guys have that question? Or if anybody else, Macaulay's kind of shaking his hand. Macaulay, is that something you guys are working on in your operation?
Yeah, it is. We charge $1 per day per animal unit, and that's grazing cover crop blends. I do a little bit of perennial custom grazing. On that $1 per day, that's cow, calf, both of them. So I don't care if it's 200-pound calf or 600-pound calf or 600-pound calf. And then we charge $2 a day for bulls.
Okay, and it looks like Brian Alexander down there at the Alexander Ranch, they're getting $1.50 per acre per day. So Rick, what are you guys getting over at your operation?
Yes, we are closer to that $1.50 per that cow calf pair. Yes. The thing you got to remember, when someone approaches you with this, I mean, someone came to us in the summer of 20 and they wanted to bring almost 200 head. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but all of a sudden you've got to have some acres. You better be prepared. You better have the infrastructure, the water, the fence, and then you better have your exit plan figured out on the date that they need to be gone so that you can get that next cover crop planted on time. So a lot's got to happen here.
Yeah, so you kind of have to have a plan drawn out for what the expectations are on both sides. Is that something you guys do?
Yes.
For custom grazing. And then Mac, can you talk a little bit about equipment? I mean, how do you pull off the custom grazing? How are you looking at like your stock density rates? How are you determining that? I know that's something you guys are doing a lot of.
Yeah, so we're in a pretty wet environment. So when it's puggy out, we just give them a larger area to work with so they don't pug up the row crop land very bad. And I would say most of my grazing on cover crops is more of a strip grazing method, and stock density can average anywhere from 25 up to 250,000 on row crop ground. And then on like a personal herd, on a perennial pasture, we can push that up a lot higher.
So Tom Cannon, you said that you're getting 60 cents of pounds per gain. Can you explain that a little bit on how you view that per gain?
Yeah, what we do is we take in mainly stocker cattle. We do it in the summer and we do it also in the winter. Whenever you're in times of highly volatile cattle markets like we have been and don't feel real confident, we take this as an alternate to buying the cattle ourselves. So we'll take them in, we'll weigh them whenever they come onto their operation, and then when they leave, we'll weigh them out and we'll be paid 60 cents per pound of gain while they're here.
Important to note too, so Dale Strickler, you're talking about the size. It's important to note animal size. Can you tell us why that's important? And then I'm going to take that question back to Jimmy Emmons. I want to see if you have changed the size of your herd because of grazing cover crops. So Dale Strickler, can you tell us about the importance of selecting your animal size?
Yes. A lot of people are talking a charge per animal unit. An animal unit is essentially about 1,000 pounds of animal live weight. And so I made good money one year custom grazing. Guy had 1,000, 1,100 pound cows, very small frame. And I carried 105 of those pairs on my irrigated quarter of grass. And then it was a 1 year deal. So I put the word out that I was looking for someone who needed custom grazing. Guy called me out of the blue and it was kind of last minute deal. Had someone back out and he offered to take his place, and he said, well, I'll bring 100 cows. And he unloads the trailer, and they're not 1,100-pound cows. They're 1,800-pound cows. I'm surprised they fit in the trailer. And you cannot carry 100 Charolais on the same amount of feed that 100 little, small cows can eat. And I promised this guy that I would carry the cows for so many months, and they were completely out of feed 2 months before that date.
Oh, wow.
And when you have to go and scramble for feed and buy feed to carry this to fulfill your end of the deal, it's disastrous. So make sure when you are custom grazing, you know the size of the animal, and also if it's growing animals, anticipate that they will be bigger at the end of the grazing season than when you begin.
Absolutely. So Jimmy, when you guys, I always introduce you as my favorite farmer, rancher, farmer, because you guys are definitely involved in all the above. So did you guys make any considerations on this aspect when it comes to grazing the cover crops on the size of your herd and the size of your animal?
Yeah, we've been steadily trying to decrease the size of our cows. Before, Ginger is the herdsman of Emmons Ranch. Ginger loves big, beautiful cows, and that's been a little bit of challenge to back up. But now we're seeing the profitability go up because more animals, smaller animals, can add more profit in the end versus a few big animals. So we've worked at that. The great thing about our operation is we have a pretty good sized cow calf herd. So we can graze cows, we can graze pairs, we can graze the yearlings once we wean them. We wean on the cover crops a lot of times. We'll move our cow calves out, let them graze a couple of weeks, and then just gather the cows up and leave the calves out there. So we're pretty diverse in what we can do, but yes, shrinking the cow size is where we're heading, and trying to get a better grazing animal out there that will forage more rough ground as well as the easy ground.
Yeah. So Jimmy, how often are you moving cattle? And then Lucinda Stunkel, if you're on the line here, I'd like for you to also talk about how often you move cattle in a regenerative system. So I'm going to have Jimmy go first, and then we'll follow with Lucinda.
So we don't have a prescription that we move cattle every day, every 2 days, every 3 days. It depends on the goals of what we want to achieve. If we're trying to maintain cows in a lull period, we can go longer period. If we're finishing calves that we're going to harvest, we'll move daily, twice a day, 2-3 times a day to get the ultimate grazing and performance out of them animals. So there's really no set prescription. If we really want to improve a pasture, we'll do daily moves, and that's natural range pasture or cover crops. So that's kind of a loaded question, Jess. We try to be very flexible and have goals in mind, and we try to target them goals.
Ours depends upon the forage. Look how tall your grass is. Don't graze any more than half of it, or even better to leave 60% of it and move on. And always have in mind where they're going next so that you can move at a moment's notice. Sometimes they'll eat more than you think they should. Sometimes they don't eat as much as you think they're going to. But you always look at the forage, whether it's cover crops or whether it's grasses. Look at what you have, how fast it's growing, and move on. Let it regrow and then come back to it later after it's regrown.
Thank you guys so much. And a couple more questions here. I just wanted to let everybody know, because we do have a considerable amount still on the Zoom call. So I am selecting our Soil Health U alumni, and that's why you're seeing a lot of these folks on your screen. They've got the blue shirts or the green shirts. And these folks have been our teachers and instructors over the last number of years. And so that's why I have really good confidence that I can call them out on a Zoom call. So yeah, just moving on here, we had some messages in the chat about mixed species grazing. And I'm looking for Gail. I don't see him on the call. Gail Fuller, are you still there or did you hop off? Talk to us about mixed species grazing. In particular, what equipment did you need to incorporate into this system that you didn't have prior to be able to focus on mixed species grazing?
Well, to begin with, for mixed species, we started with cows, but then we've added sheep, pigs, and fowl, both chickens and ducks. So obviously the management's quite a bit different from cows to sheep. Lynette started by using the electrified netting. We do rotational grazing with the sheep, just like we do with the cows, daily moves. But we've got the sheep trained now to where we can use just the roll up reels like we use with the cattle, but we have to use 2 to 3 strings instead of just one for the sheep. The pigs, we use a 1-wire hot wire at nose level. Pigs are very easy to move through a system. They're very responsive to hot wire, much more so than the sheep are or even the cattle. Chickens are free range, but there is electrified netting for poultry for those that want to keep them fenced in. I guess I'll just add that for us, there was a question in the chat earlier about multi-species grazing. All animals graze differently. Chris talks about how the cows pull and tug at the roots of the grass, but sheep clip it off. They have 2 sets of teeth, so they're actually clipping the grass. Obviously pigs do a lot more grazing below ground. So, all animals are different. We've even seen with chickens, chickens are probably the fastest to impact soil, but they're also, if you leave them in an area too long, they can do the most damage. So it's all about management like everything else.
So this is a really interesting question about the integration of livestock and animal integration into regenerative systems. And to maybe ask a question that's a little bit more heated and controversial, can this be done without livestock? Like, what if your limiting factor is the inability to incorporate livestock? So Chris, I see you down there. You look like you might be ready to answer this question, or anybody, Rick, Jimmy, what are your thoughts? And then if any of my Soil Health U alumni want to hop in on this. So is the ability to integrate livestock, if a producer cannot do that, can we still regenerate soils?
Yes, you can still regenerate soils. And again, it becomes a little bit of a time factor. So integrating livestock definitely helps to accelerate a lot of processes and practices so that we can do it in a much shorter time step. But as I mentioned, part of the integration of livestock is the impact that they're going to have on plants. And so no matter what it is that you're doing, there's going to be impact on the plants. Again, we're going to have animals, wildlife coming through. You're going to have insects. You're going to have all of these different things that are going to have an impact on the plant that is going to do some of the mimicking of what grazing will do. It's just less intensive, so it's a little bit slower of a process, but it certainly is something that you can be putting into the system. And that's another way too, that if you don't have livestock, if you're living in an area, I know like David Brandt hasn't really incorporated livestock, and part of the reason that he hasn't is because he's close to Columbus and it becomes very difficult for him to have livestock. Gabe Brown has run into this issue as well in some of the fields that he has close to Bismarck. So when you're close to an urban area, there may be some issues as far as being able to have livestock. But again, that doesn't mean that you can't be doing other things. And what Gail was talking about too with mixed species, there are ways as well, oftentimes in those urban areas, because things like chicken farming have become popular, you could integrate poultry into the operation, or again, working with how you might be able to attract. So creating shelter belts or creating areas to attract additional animals to come into your area and your field that's going to provide that impact.
Yeah, I always love this conversation because I can't ever script what it is we're going to talk about. And more than once we're talking about chickens and ducks and I think rabbits even in the chat room. But here's a really great question from the chat. And Rick, I'm going to push this back to you because I think the question was the timing of grazing cover crops. Do you have any suggestions on what cover crops to plant in order to, like how do you set up your cover crop rotation in terms of grazing? Is that different or is it the other way around?
Yeah, typically what I'm trying to do is plant a species that is going to be acceptable for grazing. So in other words, I try to go and I have outs. If that cattle are going to make it, then we've got a cocktail that will sufficiently feed and keep that group of cattle alive. If though, for some reason, the plan you had is too far going into the growing season and you can't get to those acres, we'll still have the ability to use that forage as that soil health building time. The cattle may not have made it when I wanted them to get there. Maybe that field becomes a winter stockpile field now. And then we're going to bring those cattle into that field. So again, there's no real set, prescription for any of this, but it's like Dale said earlier, you've got to make sure you've got plenty of food around because you can't grow it at the time you need it. So you got to make sure you got enough.
All right, so let's talk about specialty crops. We had a question from Jeff about hemp. Jimmy, I know that you've got a lot going on with some of your specialty markets that you're working on. And just to note, Jimmy, Rick, and Chris are in the same room in Phoenix, Arizona. So Jimmy, yeah, tell us about specialty crops. And then Tom Cannon, I'm going to loop you in on this question too. I'd love for you to tell us after Jimmy's done a little bit about your observations with adding hemp into the rotation.
Yeah, we talked about this a while ago and Rick touched on it perfectly well is we have lots and lots of options in trucking and transportation that we didn't used to have. I mean, I've had Uber trucks showing up here lately hauling beans out. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that a specialty crop can be marketed. I mean, quit thinking about the local market as in 10 or 20 or 50 miles from you. Try to raise what people want. Last year, I was driving up to Colorado to do a presentation. I just drove piles and piles of corn, milo, and wheat. And I asked everybody at that meeting, what are you planting? Well, everybody was planting corn, beans, wheat. And I told them, I said, you're planting what the market is telling you they don't want to buy right now. And so that's the kind of mindset that you got to look for is I can grow this in this window. And Chris talked about that a little bit ago. Look at your growing window that you have and your precipitation or water that you have stored and fit a crop in there. There's a market for a crop. I had sunflowers growing 2 years ago now, and a friend of mine called from Louisville, Kentucky and wanted to know what I was doing. I said, I'm getting ready to harvest some flowers. And he said, well, what are you doing with them? I said, well, they're going to the oil market. Probably I haven't really done that yet. I'm just kind of waiting to see what I've got. He said, we're buying semi-loads of flower seed right now for squirrel and bird feed here in Louisville. And he offered me 3 times what I was going to get if I'd hauled them to a conventional place. And guess what? We had trucks within 2 days hauling flower seed to Kentucky. And so it's all about networking. It's just like today. Right now is a perfect example of the list of people that's on here and the networking that you can do. And marketing is unlimited if you will unlimit your mind. That's the key. You've got to unlimit your mind and look at all the available opportunities out there. Sesico came to me to raise sesame seed because they wanted it grown in a regenerative ag system, and they had a specific market for McDonald's. So, them situations are there if you present yourself out in the public and share what you're doing.
Yeah, Tom, let's have you add on to that effect because I know you guys are working with a lot of different direct to situations.
Yeah, we do direct sales of beef. We do some sales of hemp. But I would really want to reemphasize what Jimmy said, and it's biblical. It's Romans 12:2, not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can discern what is good and the will of the Lord. And it's absolutely true. I think that by far the most difficult hurdles that we have to jump over many times is our own mind. And as we network and as people come to groups like this and listen to different speakers that have done things that maybe we didn't think of before, we can't be scared of those thoughts because of a rut that we might be in. I've had hemp, I've had just incredible numbers of different things. And a couple of the questions that I saw in here, I'll touch on real quick. One of them, Jessica, you reposted. Is grazers having success grazing fall planted covers? Absolutely. We have had success grazing every type of cover crop that we have put out, including we flew on a bunch of rye seed into growing hemp. Whenever the hemp got frosted and it wasn't a good crop anymore, we immediately turned cattle out there, and it was ready for them at that time. So once again, it's just seeing opportunity in these curveballs that Mother Nature throws us. Because anytime there is one, there's an opportunity on the backside of it.
You know, that's really wise, and not to close the door on the animal integration, livestock grazing cover crops. I do want to transition a little bit more over to the 3-pass system. I wanted to make sure I got to Brian Alexander if he's still on the line, because he's one of our Soil Health U speakers that's been with us for years upon years, but I don't see him right now. I was actually going to ask him a little bit about equipment. So if he hops back on, we'll bring him back in. So let's transition a little bit because Rick, can we hear a little bit about this 3-pass system in corn? And then the termination of the alfalfa with the roller crimper. I think that's a hot topic right now. So let's transition on over to that.
Yeah, it's a little wacky and it's pretty dangerous. Like I said, we're planting a warm season grass into a perennial. It seems a little suicidal, but there's too many benefits here. Let's go back to establishing that legume Balanza fixation clover. Tremendous clover. There's a lot of good clovers, but the reason why I picked that one is because I can terminate it mechanically. But you really need to get that established early in the fall, and you've got to, in my opinion, you need to get to the 3rd trifoliate for it to survive the winter. Okay, so with that being said, we may not be able to and I don't want to use the word guarantee, but we can't say that may be around next spring to help us. The alfalfa, though, it takes a pretty severe winter to totally destroy alfalfa and heave and not have it around. So the chances of that alfalfa being there are very high. Now, with that 20-inch row spacing and planting into this living alfalfa and then rolling it flat, and I mean, it literally is flat. And for about 2 or 3 days, it wilts up and dries up and looks like it's ready to bale, but it's still alive and still connected. That's why we've got to get the corn established very quickly, because what's going to happen is that alfalfa is flat, and then it's going to start to swoop and restand itself back up. It now becomes competition to that corn, and that's why you got to get all this done in a very timely fashion at the right time. Then and again, it's not perfected, but for 3 years now, it will absolutely suffocate that alfalfa. And it looks like the alfalfa looks like it's got weevils. You know how when you get a weevil explosion and it just destroys that alfalfa? That's what it starts to look like. And then we're releasing that fuel that the corn needs. And I didn't really stress this enough in the presentation. I'm trying to get away from large amounts of nitrogen at one time. we have to eliminate these 60, 70, 80, 90 pound injections of N. And that's why I like that slow release that alfalfa gives you for the whole growing season. So again, it's not for the faint of heart, but guys and gals, it can be done. It can be done. And then I want to answer, I think I saw a question, Jimmy reminded me about the beans. Typically, when you're using this I&J roller crimper with that chevron, you're going to need to not go past 2.5 to 3.0 beans. You're going to shred them out, break branches, and it's going to be too severe. But anything from V1 through V2.5 is perfect. And there's another anomaly happening here, and I'd really like for Chris to expand on this if she's got thoughts on this. That roller crimper is affecting that apical bud on that soybean, and it's sending a signal to that soybean to stack more nodes in a tighter relationship to the stem versus if you didn't do anything. I see it happen every single time we roll these beans. Do you have an answer for that, Chris, to why that could be happening? If we roll the beans, the nodes are real close together versus not rolling.
Yeah, can everybody hear me if I shout?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So basically, I think that there's a couple of things that are kind of going on here. And one of them is, again, what I was sort of alluding to as far as some stress on the plant. So the plants normally, and this is what we've done to plants with crop breeding, is normally plants don't want to produce a lot of progeny. They don't want to produce a lot of seed. It takes too much energy. It's too much of a waste of time, and it's too much of a waste of resources. So when you make progeny, you make the progeny have the greatest level of success that they can possibly have when it is that you go ahead and do that. So that's one of the things why, again, we're losing things like nutrient density in our food, is because we're asking them to produce a lot of progeny where they're just stacking a whole bunch of carbohydrates in there because that's what they have in reserve. And they're not worrying now about making sure that progeny, because you just have one or two, that they're going to have the best resources to survive. Now, when you do a stress, especially at that time on the beans, that's a level of stress where it's like, I don't even know for sure how easy it's going to be for me to be able to grow through my full life cycle and make sure that I'm going to produce enough progeny. So it's telling the bean plant early on that I need to get more nodes on there to make sure that I get as much progeny out there as possible, as quickly as possible. So you're kind of adding that another layer of stress on there. And that's where, too, from the stress standpoint of both the plants as well as the microbial population, and again, going back to the biology, I would say the animals as well, looking at how we stress those organisms, that FIS, the frequency, the intensity, the scale, and the timing, making sure that we're not stressing to injury is actually going to help the system to perform better. I think of this as, trying to train our systems to act like gold medal winning Olympic athletes. We need to train, we need to add the stressors, we need to keep up that intensity, but we don't want to train to injury. And so again, if you do the rolling and crimping at the wrong time, it's to the point of injury that is going to cause the system to, the plant to collapse.
So,
Gosh, that was an explanation now. Thank you so much. That answers a lot of questions.
Rick, tell us about your equipment though. Where are you getting your crimper?
The crimper is an I&J. It's out of Pennsylvania. There's somebody else got INJ.com, so it's not that. I don't remember what it is to get to them, but just search I&J Pennsylvania. You'll come up with them. And what they are in working with a company in Minnesota called Harms. So it's on a Harms bar. So it is all, their engineers know each other. They've built our 60-footer has 5 different rollers on it. So they've got all those dimensions, and it worked great. The bar was shipped to our house or our farm, and the rollers from I&J were shipped as individual units, and we had it all put together in less than a day. Very simple.
Okay, I'm going to switch to another topic here. I just want to make sure I got everything answered on the roller crimper and kind of getting all that done. So Rick, Jimmy, and Chris, let's talk about compost and what soil amendments, first of all, just give us your view on soil amendments first. I think is probably a good way to start the conversation. And then how do you utilize soil-based amendments or, carbon-based or compost or biochar? How do those fit into your system?
I'll take that one first. I'm very stubborn, and I could be wrong with my assessment of this question. But I am of the opinion that by taking everything away and working closer with Mother Nature and building this symbiotic relationship, I do not need those attributes. Now, I could be wrong. There might be a tea out there or a compost I should be using, but you've got to remember, I'm also trying to do this to scale. So I'm trying to build a system here that's going to work on 5 acres or 55,000 acres. So my theory is we are building the biology that we need. But now here's what intrigues me the most about this arena right now is the people that are working on how do we wake up, for lack of a better term, how do we wake up those microbes that are fixing the nitrogen for us in that profile to help the corn survive that first 3 weeks of life? That right there is what intrigues me the most right now, because I think we've got the biology for everything else after that corn plant comes off of the kernel. But we need that help from those microbes. And Chris and I were talking a little bit about that the other day. I'm going to hand it off to her now, but I could be way out of bounds and be too stringent in thinking, and I don't mean to be arrogant when I say this, but I just think we've got a lot of biology already happening in the system.
So basically, there's a couple of different things that I think are going on here. One is that I think you're right. For the most part, as you get a system to a certain level, you probably don't need to add inputs into the system. But if you are looking at choosing what inputs that you want to put into the system, and so there may be occasions in which you want to do that. And Jimmy will talk a little bit about, he's recently put some inputs into his system that he hadn't used in the past and the reasons why. And so a lot of the reasons why you're going to be making those choices are, again, trying to go back to the basics, making sure that you're feeding, that you get enough food into the system. And so it's another way of being able to get more food into the system. It also can be a way to get organisms that you're looking for to address a particular issue that you're having into the system. So, being able to do this on a case-by-case basis. Right now, I'm in Arizona, and I'm, incredibly grateful that I'm in Arizona. I'm not incredibly grateful I'm in Arizona, but I'm in Arizona. I'm incredibly grateful to Rick and Jimmy that they were able to be here so we could do this kind of in this way. But being here in Arizona, one of the projects that I'm working on is actually produce production in the desert, which really has been a learning experience for me as a microbiologist in the desert, growing produce. It's really been a good learning experience for me, but it has helped me to understand a little bit more, again, about what you might need and when you might need it. And again, when we're looking at things like produce production, even outside of the desert, we may be needing to use some different amendments because of the intensity of the crop production and the way that you're going about doing it. You're growing a crop for a very short period of time, and then oftentimes you're trying to double crop and get things pushed in, and you're pushing the system a little bit harder, again, than what the internal resources can have as far as the biology and the food. So utilizing amendments to help to deal with the biology and the food issues that you have there. So adding things, again, from a food standpoint, like biochar, compost, humics, all of those types of things in produce production, I think can be and may continue to be necessary, even if you get the system biologically active, because again, you're going to run into a shortfall. And the same thing goes, Jimmy's going to talk a little bit about what happened to him that required him to have to put those inputs in. And so again, I think that Rick is right, that you can get yourself to a place where you don't really need them, but there may be some occasions to address some things or some things that happen where, hey, now you decide that you do. And I'm gonna let Jimmy talk about what he's done and why he had to do it.
So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone here is dead on. I mean, I think there's soils that when you get the system fully functional, you won't need any inputs. I think Rick's dead on that. What we have in an arid environment is being able to build that community to the capacity that we need. So we found that adding some compost tea, some molasses, some humics in furrow or as a seed treatment, I can provide with the humics, the housing for the family that I've got down there. I can put the molasses in to provide the carbohydrates to help feed the family down there. And so everything that you've got to think about is feeding the system. And if you can enhance that, then it gets back to what Rick talked about a little bit earlier this morning is ROI. If I can take a few dollars per acre and invest that and turn that into several dollars per acre and enhance my soil health score or my health of my soil, just like Rick says, I will guarantee you I will sacrifice yield every day if I can improve my soil, hands down. So once again, if I can find an amendment that I can add biologically that will enhance my community and enhance my soil health, then I'm advancing my bottom line in the future. And so I think there's a spot for everyone that stated things here that fits. We found that more highly degraded soil takes longer to turn around. The further it was degraded, the harder it is to get it back to the original place that you're at. If you had a highly functional soil that was only degraded a little bit, that will turn around very quickly. And so it depends on where you're at in location, climate, environment, everything. And so there is times that I think that you can add some biological stimulants that provide the correct food and habitat for the biological system to build that more rapidly than you can waiting for it to come.
Yeah, that's just a really great segment. I'm gonna ask one more question on this topic for everybody. And then we're getting a lot in the chat about just determining different blends for cover crops and rye and utilizing wheat. But let me first pivot back to last year's speaker, Dr. Tricia Jackson. She is an expert in biochar, and she has spent a majority of her personal and professional life teaching farmers about biochar, making biochar. And so she has just a really amazing background in the ability to talk about what biochar and these different amendments do for the soil. She's also we started a farmer's market together in 2017. So she's also on my local foodie panel as well. So Trish, can you just add on a little bit to what Jimmy and Rick talked about as far as these soil amendments and the ability to maybe kickstart the system?
Sure. What we're hearing today is how important carbon is to the system. And you guys know me as the biochar person, but what biochar is carbon. And so there's a new kid in town, and that's Prairie Food. I started working with Prairie Food because of my background in carbon and because I believe in soil health. And so what we've figured out how to do is to take agricultural waste and turn it into microcarbons. And so everybody's kind of made the point that we have to feed that soil ecosystem. And so what we need to do is provide food. And so that's through living roots in the soil, generally is what we've heard our whole careers, right? We got to keep living roots in the soil. And that's really, really important. But one of the things that living roots do is they provide a flush of carbon constantly into the soil. And so to kind of fill that gap, if you can't get a living root in the soil or you don't have that in your system yet, we got to get carbon in there. And so what's really cool about Prairie Food and why I've transitioned from biochar to Prairie Food is because it's a carbon microcarbon food source for microbes that's building the soil from the bottom up. And so I just want to encourage you guys to look into that a little bit. It's one of those things that it's a soil amendment. It's building up that soil from the bottom. Instead of feeding the plants, we're feeding the soil, and that's the key.
Absolutely. So thank you, Trish, on that. And, how do we know we're doing that, guys? How do we know that we're feeding the soil? How do we know that we're building it up? I'd like to transition a little bit into, I promise I'm going to get to the cover crop selection, but can we talk a little bit about soil health testing again? I know you guys all have mentioned the Haney test, and I've got Willie here from Ward Laboratories that has been a part of our conversation a lot in the past. So briefly, if Rick, can you talk a little bit about soil tests? And then Willie, if you have anything you'd like to add on how producers can get started with soil tests to determine, their baseline of their soil so that they can figure out how to take the first steps or the next steps in increasing their soil health.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I mentioned it in the presentation. I'm really getting away from the old standard soil testing, and I'm not relying all my decisions on the Haney test, but it's just another tool in the toolbox. We track all of that data, so I like to see trends. Is the soil health trending up or is it trending down? I think too many times we look at one snapshot of time with where we are right now and make those decisions. You've got to look out further into the future, and then you also need your past history to help tell you where you're going. So I don't really have a lot to add. Willie can add way more than I can. I just really like that Haney test because it is a soil health test.
And Willie, briefly, can you just fill us in? How can you guys help producers on this?
I think what Rick's saying is correct. But in order to establish where you are with your Haney test, one of the things I always ask guys to consider is to try and find a soil on your farm that hasn't been worked. In other words, a native virgin soil, just to see where you've come from, and that then compared to the a soil test of your lands will give you a good indication of from where you came from to where you've degraded it to. And then you can really, the Haney test is really two different parts. It gives you an idea of the total microbiology as we read it from the CO2 24-hour respiration test. That gives you a total indication of your microbiology in the soil. I like to look at these tests that isn't like an entry test. If you want to know more about who is represented in those in that total microbiology, you have to look at the PLFA. That will then give you an indication of all your functional groups in the soil food web. In other words, what is the bacteria, what is the fungi, and then within the fungi we can also classify the mycorrhiza from the other fungi, the predators, the rhizobia, and then we can also look at the ratios, and we have kind of standards where all these should be within an healthy soil. And then what we further then try and do is to classify your soils into what we would call as a soil that is just surviving, a soil that is in progression, and a soil that is already in the regenerative phase. And we have kind of standards for several of these soil health indicators to try and put each one of these soil indicators within that different category, so it becomes easier, as Gabe always says, to identify your resource concerns. That is the one thing, and one of the other things which I'm starting to have a great interest in is in what we call the total nutrient extract. In other words, what is the total amount of nutrients that is in a soil calcium, magnesium. In other words, if you would, it's like an assay that you would do if you wanted to start a copper mine. What is the total copper amount of nutrients in a soil? And we do all of these, and we call it a total nutrient extract. And from that is your reservoir of nutrients. We then use the Haynes H3A. In other words, what is released from the reservoir and made available. And this then gives you a good indication of what the microbiological action has made available from your total soil reservoir that we've measured. And that is, it's work in the initial phases. So we try and establish what is a reasonable percentage that can be released and maintained, because every time when I hear somebody like Rick, he said, "Look, I don't need any nutrients." That's great. And what I've also noticed from Rick's presentation is that he's only taking into account the nutrients released from the biomass. And so we want to add what is in the soil and how it is released, and give you an indication of that. And that in combination will give you a much better picture of your soil health. And then if we have the microbial profile in its totality and broken down into the functional groups, you have a beautiful picture of what your soil looks like at this moment in time. And I agree with Rick further that if we know from what baseline we are starting to work, and how you've regenerated it, and how you are then building it, so you need to do certain tests and track the progression. Just a closing remark on the Haney test. The Haney soil health score is always, what does this mean? I think in this instance, Rick has put together the three most important aspects of soil health. In other words, what is the basic driver of soil health? In other words, the microbiology and the food that's available, the water extractable organic carbon and the water extractable organic nitrogen, and what is the ratio of that. And the soil health number puts into context those three numbers in a beautiful formula, which he calls a soil health score. And that we've done work and trying to correlate that soil health score with a number of soil health indicators, and we get correlations like on total microbial biomass. It correlates up to 0.75. With a completely different test like the mycorrhiza, it correlates like 0.72. And these are incredibly strong biological correlations, which indicates to me that the soil health score is a very, very informative number in the soil health industry.
Thank you so much, Willie. You know, I hear yourself and a lot of others talking about this is a systems approach.
Absolutely.
Soil health, and being able to accumulate all the information that you need to make good decisions, but then also, most importantly, you know, being able to monitor and watch. And Rick talks about that a lot, about watching the data and watching the trends and being able to make, you know, really data-driven decisions as a producer. So I know that there's a lot of, you know, we talked about Topsoil app, and we talked about a couple other, you know, different platforms that are out there for producers to use. I see this area of agriculture really starting to scale up in terms of us being able to make agronomic decisions based on you know, these parameters.
Can I also just say as a closing remark, you can actually regard soil health testing as a in a progression sort of a system. It's no good if you know soil is completely gone and broken, and then we can just do a ordinary just a CO2 analysis just to give an where is the guy standing, because he's not going to find a great indication of how many of the functional groups are there. So we need to, from that basis, build onto it. If you add the PLFA, it gives you a breakdown, and then when we get to the mycorrhizas, one of the things which I'm working on and adding to the lab is mycorrhizal colonization and mycorrhizal. Depending on what you want to know, you can get an incredibly beautiful picture of what your soil looks like at any specific given time.
Yeah, we didn't even get into tissue sampling. I mean, we could we could talk for a long time about that and just the importance of having that information out there. So yeah, thank you so much for that, Willie. And there have been just great comments in the chat while you were talking about different ways that producers can view this and can monitor this. So I want to respect everybody's time. I know that Dr. Chris Nichols has to hop off the line. She has another conference that she's attending today. So I just want to take this time to thank Chris for being here. Thank you for sharing your time and your space with all of us.
Can I quickly make a couple of comments?
Please
I'm not
do.
going to go this way, but before I leave, in regards to soil testing, I mean, I think I want to echo what everyone is saying. You know, it is a tracking tool more than an actual quantification tool. So you do want to do it as a tracking tool and to think about it in context with things. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I've been kind of trying to work for a while, haven't gotten it all done, but I do have one that at least is done that I am sharing. I think there's a link and there's possibly, I think, Jenny, that there's going to be it posted with my PDF file of a methodology. I've got some videos on some other methodology, but the one thing that I wanted to do was that have the soil test that I'm looking at is looking at soil aggregation. And I want to sort of echo that this is one of the best tests that's out there for measuring soil health. In all of the soil health indicators, in all of the different types of tests that they use, it is one of the things that's included. The National Soil Tilth Lab in Iowa, put together what they call a SMAF index. And what they did was they analyzed, it's a soil management framework, and they analyzed a number of different soil tests and took a look at their correlation to soil health parameters. And what ended up happening was that they found that aggregation was one of the best measurements and indicators all of the time across the board on being able to do this. And it's because aggregation unites biology, geology, physics, and chemistry together to be able to assess this. And it indicates things like porosity and infiltration, the slake test and the clod tests that are used. But this way you can do this. I did this with farmers and ranchers in the province of Alberta about 2 years ago, and I had them make their own sieves. And so farmers and ranchers can make their own sieves and take a look at this test in Canada. I think farmers and ranchers anywhere in the world, not trying to slight farmers and ranchers in Canada, but anywhere in the world, we can put together these sieves and do this test. So the methodology, you can do it both in a demonstrative manner, which is what I did with the farmers and ranchers because we just did it in one day, or you can do it on a more quantitative manner and be able to, similar to what I would do in the lab as a researcher, measuring soil aggregation. So I want to encourage you to utilize that tool. And hopefully I'll be posting some videos. It's Rick is giving me the signal and it's on the thing for Rick. And hopefully it'll be giving you more of that information too on videos of farmers and ranchers utilizing these tools.
Very cool. And Chris, we'll be sure to post your social media channels on our social media channels so that everybody that have been listening along will be able to have that. Somebody just asked for Jimmy Emmons' contact information. Same thing. We're going to put that out on our Facebook page here shortly. as soon as the conference is over. So just to honor everybody's time and their commitments today. Hey, Cutie, I see Mac's little ones there. Let's go ahead and I'd like to get closing remarks from Rick and Jimmy. If you guys have anything else that, I know that there's always so much to offer. Jimmy, if you have a minute to just bring us on home really quick, and then I think we'll begin to wrap it up. And before we do that, I want to say how extraordinary it is that we had over 500 registrations for this event. And to me, that indicates that folks are thirsty for this knowledge, but that they also want to register so that they can go back and watch the, the recordings that we're going to produce in the next couple weeks. But the fact that we're on a Q&A, 5 hours down the road, and there's still 120 plus folks joining the conversation, to me, that is so reaffirming to the movement of soil health and to regenerative agriculture. So folks, stick with us. We are here. High Plains Journal is going to be supporting Farmer U this summer. We'll have Soil Health U in 2022. So do not go anywhere. And to that effect, Jimmy or Rick, can one of you guys, let's bring it on home.
Yeah, I may have to raise my assessment from a C- up to a C today, just from the audience that we had. And I think that the big take home away today is got to be, we can do this, folks. And we have the ability to communicate with one another, to learn from one another about everything we need to know in the soil. There is experts that's studying every aspect as we speak. And we know that our mind is the obstacle. So if you remove that and say, I'm game for anything and I need to learn how to do this, you can make it work. It is doable anywhere in the entire world. And throw away, it won't work here, or Jimmy's doing it there, but I can't do it here. Ditch that thought, open your mind up and let it roll, and we can do this. I think that's the biggest takeaways there is. We showed you today the science and the practicality of how to do it. And I think that is the key. And I give you an assessment of what I think where we're at in the nation and where we need to go. So I think we have the tools. Now all we got to do is put them together and build it. And I'll let Rick finish up here. Thanks a lot.
I just want to say, wow. Jessica, you have put together quite the program today. You had a vision for this. You started with Jimmy, and then he told us how, where we are and where we need to be headed. Then you brought Chris in to give us the real technical deep dive. And then I brought it home with we can do this on the farm. I just kudos and thank you so much. You did a wonderful job. There are so many people. I see faces on names on my screen of people that could be giving this presentation instead of me. So I am honored that you asked me to do this. And like I told you, when I agreed to do this virtual, I said, I'll do it in one, you got to have me back live sometime. So I hope you still do that.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody. I'm going to close the same way that I closed Soil Health U last year, probably by crying, but never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people who want to change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. So on that note, let's go ahead and land the plane here. Let's call this good. Thank you so much for riding with us. We will see you all soon. And as I ended our call yesterday, I love you all. Like, I seriously feel that way. I feel so connected to the stewards of the land. We are doing amazing things, and let's keep on going forward. We can do this.